when it first appeared in Japan, but it has taken some phases to evolve to the modern Japanese we use nowadays. By the Heian period, Chinese had considerable influence on the vocabulary of old Japanese. Then, late Middle Japanese included changes in features closer to the modern language, and the first appearance of European loan words called Gairaigo. Early 17th century to mid-19th century, the standard dialect moved from the Kansai region to the Edo region, which is modern Tokyo. Following the end of Japan's self-imposed isolation in 1853, the flow of loan words from European languages increased. Almost 130 million people speak Japanese, making Japanese the 9th most widely spoken language in the world. Although Japanese is spoken almost exclusively in Japan, there are another 5 million people who speak Japanese with some degree of proficiency, predominantly Japanese descendants in Hawaii, California, Guam, Brazil. Some more Japanese immigrant communities are also found in Peru, Argentina, Australia, Canada, and the Philippines. Before and during World War II, through Japanese annexation of Taiwan and Korea, and partial occupation of China, the Philippines, and some Pacific islands, locals in those countries learned Japanese as the language of the empire. As a result, many elderly people in these countries can still speak Japanese. Among linguists, relationship to other languages have been researched and debated, but for now, Japanese is classified as a member of the Japonic languages or as a language isolate with no known living relatives. Korean and Japanese languages are not mutually intelligible in any way. While Japanese uses many of the same Chinese characters that Chinese uses, the two languages are not related. Now, we would like to show you how Japanese sounds like. Hideko and I have a little conversation about studying Japanese. John will translate what we are saying in English. Please note how Hideko and I address our names in Japanese, and there will be some English words in Japanese pronunciation. Hideko さん、
はい。
RC のレキシコン日本語プログラムをお手伝いいただきありがとうございます。
Hideko-san, thanks for helping me with IRC's Lexicon Japanese program.
どういたしまして。
Oh, it's my pleasure.
でも、プログラムの準備をしていたら、だんだん日本語を勉強する人たちがかわいそうになりました。
But while I was preparing for the program, I started feeling sorry for people who study Japanese.
どうしてですか？
Sorry? Why?
だって日本語は書き方がかなり複雑だし、発音も英語とは全然違うじゃない。
Because Japanese has so many different ways of writing, and the pronunciation is very different from English.
でも私たちだってそうだったでしょ？たくさんの英語の単語を覚えなくてはいけなかったし、英語の発音は難しいし、誰もかわいそうだなんて思わなかったんじゃない？
Well, when we studied English, we had to learn so many vocabulary words, and the pronunciation was difficult too. But no one was sorry for us.
新しい言語を覚えれば視野も広がるでしょ？そう思いませんか、はるこさん。とにかく私は日本語を学生さんに教えるのがとっても好きなんです。
Learning a new language is broadening, don't you think? Anyway, I love teaching Japanese to students.
確かにそうですね。秀子さんはやっぱりいつも正しいですね。
Very true, Hideko. You are always right.
Well, how was it? Does it sound very different? I hope you caught some English words in our conversation. IRC, or program pronounced in Japanese. Now, you are going to listen to a bit more sophisticated Japanese in haiku format. Haiku is a Japanese poem of 17 syllables in 3 lines of 5, 7, and 5, traditionally evoking images of the natural world. Learning haiku requires an advanced level of Japanese language competency and deep understanding of Japanese art. So hats off to John, who studied haiku as a native from the US. Enjoy the famous haiku by Basho Matsuo.
As Haruko mentioned, a Japanese haiku is a 3-line poem with 5 syllables, 7 syllables, and 5 syllables in the respective lines. When I first encountered haiku in English many decades ago, we thought almost any kind of poem could be a haiku as long as it had 3 lines. But the Japanese haiku has a few more rules and conditions that actually increase the listener's enjoyment. So the 5 and 7 syllable pattern is not just arbitrary. There is a preference in conversational Japanese for phrases with 5 or 7 syllables. Someone took a survey to determine the most beautiful word in Japanese, and one of the top winners was arigatou, which means thank you, and it has 5 syllables in the Japanese sound system. Additionally, most haiku include a seasonal word. Enjoyment of the changes and contrasts of the 4 seasons is deeply ingrained in Japanese culture. In this poem, the seasonal word is frog, and in poetry, the frog is associated with spring. And in this poem, the frog is probably a big fat bullfrog. The ambiguity of Japanese grammar also adds to the effect of this poem. The second line is kawazu tobikomu. Kawazu is a bullfrog, and tobikomu is dive in, but the verb is the equivalent of simple present, which can have a future meaning in Japanese. So the listener may wonder, did the frog jump in? Is the frog going to jump in? And then in the third line, kersplash, suddenly the listener gets the answer to the question. Actually, the poem says, Mizuno oto, the sound of water, but some translators like to make it a little more immediate, because with this structure, the listener is kind of thrust into the virtual reality of the poem. So a haiku can actually encompass a whole world in 3 lines. So Japanese poetry is most often enjoyed by live reading rather than reading on paper. And it is customary to read poems twice. So here is Japan's most famous haiku with my wonderful American accent. Fulu ikea, kawazu tobikomu, mizu no oto. Fulu ikea, kawazu tobikomu, mizu no oto. Thank you.
So now that you heard how Japanese sound like, now we will show you how we write in Japanese. Basically, we have 3 ways of writing Japanese. One is Kanji, and Hiragana, and Katakana. Here you can see Tokyo written in 3 ways. First, I will explain to you about the kanji. Japan borrowed kanji characters from China around 3rd or 4th centuries to write in Japanese language. From the kanji characters, Hiragana and Katakana were developed later on. This slide shows that the Nihon Shoki, the Chronicle of Japan, written in the 8th century, was only written in kanji. The one as this one. This slide, kanji is used to represent words of ideas and have different meaning and pronunciation depend on their context. A kanji can be word by itself, like a key, which means tree, or a kanji can be part of another word, like mokuzo, which means wooden construction. The pictures of the right side is a famous temple made of wood called Horyuji. And also, the same kanji here, we pronounce differently. One is ki and the other is moku. Kanji also be used for the name of places or the people, like myself, Hideko. You can see that my name. The kanji education that you wondered how many kanji we have to study. And in the elementary school in Japan, first and sixth graders will learn about 1,000 kanji, and the middle and the high school, 7th through 12th graders will learn about 1,000 additional kanji. So altogether 2,000. It is very difficult to learn how that many kanji because each kanji have different meanings and pronunciations depend on the context, I said.
Okay, thank you, Hideko. Now, this is hiragana, looks like. Hiragana is the basic Japanese phonetic alphabet, you can say. It represents every sound in the Japanese language. This grid or matrix of 10 by 5 shows gojuon, which means 50 sounds. Sorry. And it shows the order of hiragana starting from a, I, U, E, O, from the top of the right, the top I, U, E, O. And you may wonder why there are 4 spaces, empty spaces, like a blank spaces here. That means there are the spot of the old Japanese, which is obsolete now. So we technically have a 46 hiraganas. And hiragana is also used to write names, like Hideko, her name was all 3 kanji characters, but my name is 2 hiraganas, Haru, and Ko is kanji. Hiragana is the first form of Japanese writing that children learn. Hiragana also helps reading manga or anime or novels when readers encounter difficult kanjis. You can see in manga, this picture here, that hiragana is added to the side of kanji. It's very small and difficult to read, but it has how to read. And hiragana is used for changing meanings of kanji by adding a hiragana character after the kanji, because kanji by itself will not convey the meaning. It doesn't say past or present or negative or positive. So hiragana helps to make meaning of kanji. And hiragana is also used wherever kanji characters wouldn't be available.
So this is the katakana system, and it relates directly to the hiragana system, just a different style of writing. And one reason, well, one popular, maybe the most common usage of katakana nowadays is to transcribe foreign words into Japanese. Earlier, Haruko talked about gairaigo, and which denotes foreign words that are used in Japanese. For example, television is written telebi, and probably was originally television, but the Japanese like to shorten complicated words, so telebi is what it became. And katakana is also used for other foreign words like names of foreign countries, foreign places, and also names of foreigners, like my name is shown there, written, John is written in Katakana. So here are some examples of foreign words that have worked their way into Japanese and their Katakana equivalents. Japanese sound system has 50 sounds. The English sound system has about several hundred, depending on how you measure it. So when you put a word into Katakana, it doesn't always sound the same. For example, on this list, let's ask Hideko to pronounce these in Japanese. Like, how about fast food?
Fast food.
And how about project?
Project.
And everybody's favorite, vodka.
Vodka.
And the great state of California.
California.
And baseball is an interesting example because you can write in katakana baseball and it will be understood. But when baseball was introduced into Japan, there was a preference for converting foreign things to kanji phrases. So the kanji here says yakyu, which is now the most commonly used word for baseball. And now I'd like to say a word about what's called the Latin alphabet, which I thought was just our English alphabet. In Japanese, this alphabet is called Romaji, which means the letters of Rome or the Latin alphabet. So it's not an official writing system in Japan, but I think a lot of people can read it. And it's especially useful to use Romaji when you're not Japanese and you're trying to learn to speak the language. So most students start off reading Japanese with Romaji. And another common use is inputting Japanese into word processors and computers. And it is possible to have a Hiragana keyboard, but I think even Japanese people probably use Romaji more than Hiragana to input for a computer. And then there are the case, like especially in the early days of personal computers, not all of them could display Japanese. So in that case, a lot of Japanese was written with the Roman alphabet.
Well, we would like to have fun here. Johnson, what do you see on the screen?
I see 2 chickens in a garden.
Okay, so can you say that in Japanese?
Niwa, 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 niwatori ga iru. Is that right?
Hideko-san, Johnson is kind of mumbling like niwa, 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 niwa. Is that correct?
It is, yes, but I was pronounced again that niwa 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 niwatori ga iru.
So this is kind of a Japanese tongue twister. It's called hayakuchi kotoba, which just means fast speaking. But here, if you break down this sentence, niwa, the first one means the garden, and it's written with the kanji. And then niwa is an example of particles that mean in, and they're written with hiragana. Chickens or other Japanese nouns don't have a plural. So if you want to say more than one, you have to use one of these kanji expressions that indicates the number. So that's also pronounced niwa, strangely enough. And then the chicken itself is known as a niwatori. So that gives us niwa, the 4 niwas in a row. And then ga aru, ga iru means there are, also written in hiragana. So it's a little crazy. Japanese like to do this kind of wordplay though. So if we look at the grammar of Japanese, we see a lot of interesting points, let's say. So the word order is normally subject, object, verb. The verb is always at the end. And the subject may not actually be the subject of the verb. The subject of a sentence, which is noted by the particle wa, is the topic of the sentence. And as I mentioned before, nouns have no number. They also have no gender. And there are no articles in Japanese, which is great because it makes things easy, but it also sometimes makes things hard to express what you're trying to say. Verbs have a conjugation just for tense and voice, but not for person. So again, that makes it easy, but it also sometimes makes it hard to express who is saying something. And adjectives are also especially interesting because, for example, a Japanese adjective by itself, for example, atsui, is a complete Japanese sentence. It means it's hot. And the interesting thing is adjectives also have a past tense. So you can say atsukatta. That means it was hot.
So by now, you probably know Japanese is quite different from English or some language you may know. We would like to continue showing some more unique features of Japanese.
John-san, how many ways can you say I in English?
I, well, I think there's only one way, and that's I.
Hideko-san, how many ways can you say I in Japanese?
I say at least 15 or so different ways to say I.
15? Can you tell us some examples, at least maybe 5?
The most standard way is watashi. Previous. And but many male are saying boku or ore. Some people are used uchi or jibun too.
Well, but still, why so many?
Because of genders, age, and social status, and also the politeness differences.
Yes, politeness. What Hideko-san just said will lead to this topic. Japanese has an extensive grammatical system to express politeness and formality. This reflects the Japanese society is very hierarchical. The Japanese language can express different levels in social status, determined by factors such as job, age, experience, or even psychological state. That is, a person asking a favor tends to speak politely. Strangers will also speak to each other politely. And Japanese children rarely use polite speech until they are teens, at which point they are expected to begin speaking in a more adult manner. Earlier, Hideko-san said that there are so many ways to say I in Japanese, depending on gender, age, or social class. Now, we will show you 3 types of honorific Japanese languages. They are Teineigo, polite language, Sonkeigo, respectful language, and Kenjogo, humble language. For example, verb iku, go in English, becomes ikimasu in polite form, but is irasharu in respectful speech, and ukagao or mairu in humble speech. Now, we will show you how we use honorific prefixes o or go to show the politeness. Polite people, speaker like Hideko-san or me, we will use o sushi instead of sushi, and we say osake instead of sake. We can also add go to the abstract noun cooperation like kyōryoku to request cooperation politely. For example, you see in this picture, she is Mrs. Yuriko Koike, the Tokyo governor. She urged everyone to wear a mask and keep a social distance. And she said, "Go kyōryoku onegai shimasu. Go kyōryoku onegai shimasu. I request your cooperation," in polite manner, so people will listen to her. But you need to be very careful of using o or go because it doesn't always work. It's not that simple. Sometimes if you put o to For example, naka means inside. You put o to naka, then it means stomach. So it completely changed the meaning. And lastly, I would like to show you this. Everybody know Japanese, we say Hideko-san, John-san, like that. So the most common suffix is san, and san means all of Mr., Mrs., Miss, and Miss. So Tanaka-san, when I say Tanaka-san, it could be Mr. Tanaka or Mrs. Tanaka or their unmarried daughter. Other common titles include sama, a more polite version of san, sensei for teachers. While chan is most commonly used for children, it's also used fairly widely among family and friends. Kun is the male equivalent of chan. It's used for kids, especially for boys, and between peers and friends. And next.
Historically, that English has been borrowing straight from the word from the other language, including from Japanese. Here are some examples of Japanese words written in Romaji. In the picture shows in the first one is judo, karate, and taiko. Those are the words.
Okay. Well, we are coming very close to the end. And if you remember, Hideko mentioned in the beginning that one of our main goals is to teach you how to introduce yourself in Japanese when you meet Japanese people first time. So Hideko will demonstrate. She will be a teacher, and John will act as a student. And I encourage audience, even though you are muted, please practice on your own with us. Let's begin.
The first phrase I will say in English, and then I will say the same in Japanese. Then the John, as a student, will repeat the same in Japanese.
Hi.
I will say that nice to meet you. はじめまして。
はじめまして。
Can you try John again? はじめまして。
はじめまして。
Great. The second phrase is that I will say who I am in English, and then I will say the same in Japanese. And John will say who he is in English,
No.
and he will say the same in Japanese. My name is Hideko. Hideko です。
My name is John. John です。
The last phrase is I will say in English, and then I will say the same in Japanese, and John will repeat it in Japanese. Please be nice to me. よろしくお願いします。
よろしくお願いします。
So you can try again. よろしくお願いします。
よろしくお願いします。
Great. Now we will do only in Japanese. はじめまして。
はじめまして。
ひでこです。
ジョンです。
よろしくお願いします。
よろしくお願いします。
Now John explain about the last phrase. よろしくお願いします。
はい。So, よろしくお願いします is widely used in Japanese society. Actually, onegai means a favor, but it's not only for favors, it's for maybe establishing the community feeling of Japanese communities, let's say. So if you ask a favor of someone, yes, you can say yoroshiku onegai shimasu. But even something like moving to a new place, when you meet your neighbors, you say, yoroshiku onegaishimasu. It means, you know, they're not doing you a favor, but you say, you know, we want to be good neighbors. Let's get along together. And the same if you go to a new job or to a new department in your company, you greet all of your coworkers and say, yoroshiku onegaishimasu, meaning I'm going to work with you guys, so let's try to make it work. So this is a very useful phrase, even though it's a little complicated, but if you practice a little bit, you'll get it.
Well, time flies, and this is our final presentation. I think audience probably is very familiar to all these famous Japanese people. But I will ask Hideko and John, who are these famous Japanese people. And I'll start with the top left corner by a clockwise order. Hideko-san.
Hi, the first person is Emperor Akihito.
Yes. John-san.
That is Ichiro Suzuki, who plays, or maybe used to play, I don't know, for the Seattle Mariners.
Yes, Ichiro retired, so used to play. And next, Hideko-san.
Ken Watanabe, he is a famous actor.
And John.
That is Mr. Shinzo Abe, who is the Prime Minister of Japan.
And Hideko-san.
The bottom person is Akira Kurosawa. He is a very well-known movie director.
And John.
That is Yoko Ono, who is an artist and a musician, and also the widow of John Lennon.
And Hideko-san.
Murakami, I'm sorry, Haruki Murakami. He is a writer.
Yes, very famous. And the next, the last one, John-san.
That is Hayao Miyazaki. He's the founder of Ghibli Studio.
Thank you. We appreciate IRC to give us an opportunity to share Japanese language. And thank you very much, arigatou gozaimasu, for everyone to participate. I hope you enjoyed our presentation and continue studying Japanese. Please stay safe and sayonara, arigatou gozaimashita. Hideko-san.
Hi. I have been teaching Japanese language to the local high schools for more than 15 years. My advice to you is to remember the word order in English mainly determine the meaning of the sentence. But in Japanese, the word order include particles determine the meaning of the sentence. If you study those particles, you will be able to determine the relationship between words, which will help you understand the meaning of a sentence. ご視聴いただき、どうもありがとうございました。さようなら。
Thanks to everyone for joining us today. And my anecdote about learning Japanese is when I went to Japan in 1978, there was no internet, of course, but I bought a radio and I just left it on a lot. So even though I couldn't understand it, I was hearing the sound and the rhythm of Japanese. So nowadays with the World Wide Web, you can download and stream lots of material in Japanese. So it's much easier to do that outside of Japan nowadays. For example, NHK, the government broadcaster, has both radio and TV broadcast, and there's Japanese movies on YouTube and other services. So even if you can't understand it, I think it's worthwhile to just get accustomed to the sound of Japanese. Arigatou gozaimashita.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We do have a few minutes. I don't know if anybody has any last minute questions here before we sign off. If not,
Yes, I'm wondering if you could tell us where a person could learn Japanese in the Kansas City area.
Hideko-san can answer that.
I privately teach at home the Japanese language, but Saturday school have like JFL, that the Japanese as a foreign language, teaching at the same place in the Leewood. So maybe that if you are interested in the Japanese language, you can start from the group lesson from the Saturday school, Japanese school. That's a good source.
Yeah, also JCCC has expensive Japanese. Our friends teach there, so that's another way, but you have to, it's for the credit, so you have to study.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you are very strongly that want to learn that the Japanese language, that the college level will be good.
I have a question about the kanji characters that are similar in Japanese and Chinese. Do they have the same meaning? Can you read them, but it's difficult to, the spoken word is much different, I understand.
Yeah, throughout the Chinese, we use the kanji character from that 3rd or 4th century to the currently now, so that the dynasty has changed. So the pronunciation also changed. So it's very difficult for us to know that which pronunciation is the right things to do, but the meaning is the same.
Yeah, but I should say, you know, like Hideko explained, in Japan, like standard, you know, people know 2,000 characters, but Chinese have way more, because Japanese simplified these Chinese characters into Japanese. So Chinese have like more, I don't know, 10,000 that we can't even recognize or read. So if they have the same characters, yes, then meaning is the same.
Yeah, I was amazed that I saw you said about 1,000, 2,000 Chinese characters that, you know, kids in school learned. In China, if you learn 2,000 characters, it's you can read newspaper. So it's to answer the earlier question, that if you know the character but you do not know, your pronunciation are different, but you can literally read the newspaper if you do not know how to pronounce it. When I was young, I was reading Japanese newspaper. I did not read I read it in the Chinese way, but I can understand like 80 or 85% of it because of the Chinese characters there. But it's very interesting that you know, school kids learn so many Chinese characters.
I have been to China a couple of times. And I took a taxi, and I can't speak Chinese, so I wrote on the paper, I want to go to the airport. So
yeah,
I wrote Kuko, like Japanese way of airport. Driver didn't understand because you guys use airport completely different kanji characters that can't even imagine that means airport. So I think Chinese are very complicated for us.
but yeah, some of the Chinese characters over the, you know, all these years, it has been changed. Like for the stamp, like the stamps for the letters, mail stamps, when you write down the Chinese characters out, it's like a hand and the paper, right? It actually in Chinese means toilet paper.
Letter.
Talk about toilet paper our previous session, but it is the stamps. But you know, over the years the meaning changed, but a lot of meanings are still there.
Hi,
Well,
I'm
I
Fran
should
Lemry.
say, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm Fran Lemry. I'm the president of the Heart of America, Japan America Society. And I just want to thank Matthew and Evan for allowing Haruko, Hideko, and John, who are all board members of our Heart of America, Japan America Society, for allowing them to do this show. One of my Japanese teachers was Hideko Schackmann. She never made any progress with me because I'm not very good at learning languages. So it's not her fault. It was my fault.
Not that
So, yes, it was. So anyway, we just really appreciate your allowing us to do that. And we hope that everybody enjoyed the presentation. I know I did.
Yes, we sure did. And I should say, Joan, who was just speaking, will be presenting our lexicon next week on Chinese. So please return next week and expand your language palette just a little bit more. Thank you so much to our speakers, Hideko, Haruko, John. We appreciate it so much, you donating your time. It means so much. And to everybody who has regularly supported the IRC, we can't thank you enough. So please head to our website, irckc.org, see all the programs we have coming up. And again, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your night, everyone.